Hi, everyone. Shalom. I'm Rabbi Eric Slayton of Beth Israel Synagogue in Hamilton, Ohio.
I'm Pastor Billy at Fairfield Wesleyan Church, and I'm the senior pastor there.
I'm Pastor Dave Hicks, and I'm the lead pastor at Walden Ponds Community Church of the Nazarene.
Hey, good afternoon, Pastor Shaq. I am the senior pastor of Truth and Life Community Church here in the city of Hamilton.
All right, let's get this kicked off. So what does faith mean to you?
So for Jews, the 5 books of Moses are really the basis of our tradition. And for us, a relationship with God is established among the patriarchs, right, in the book of Genesis. But from Exodus on a people, our faith is through as a community, not only what we believe, but what we do. And so working together as a community, praying together, studying together, all of those things make up what we would say is the basis of our faith.
You know, faith means to me, I've grown up in the Nazarene background and then now the Wesleyan Church. It's something that keeps me moving forward, something that helps me to focus my energy, my passions. We have a real great belief that faith is the thing that's hoped for, right? The thing that's unseen. And so we look at the narrative that the Bible possesses, and we want to make sure that we stay focused on the bigger message of creation versus just what we're temporarily experiencing. We want to see the story of faith from Genesis to Revelation and just live out our faith in community with one another in love.
Similar to what Billy said, faith is the assurance of that which is unseen. But I think when I talk about faith with my congregation, it's the understanding that it's a decision to believe that there is a possibility of a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And so faith, what faith means to me personally is that I know that even though the things that are going on in my life may not be the way that I want them to be, I know that my faith holds strong because at that point I know that God is always present, no matter what it is that I'm going through.
Faith means to me, it's what I hold on to. It's everything. It's what I believe when times are tough, when times are good, but it's that thing that I can hold on to. And know to be, it's been tried, it's been tested, and it's been true. And that's what I hold on to is my faith. And that's what gets me through those times of knowing that it won't always be like this. And that, and like the scripture says, I can hope for, I can believe for, so I can have hope that things will get better. I believe that things will get better. So, and then the thing about it I love about faith is that when I'm weak, thank goodness it doesn't take a lot of faith. Because it says faith is the size of a mustard seed. So if I could just muster up a little bit of faith, I'm confident things are going to be all right.
All right. So many people struggle with their faith in times of personal challenges or on a more global scale. What do you as a faith leader say or do to offer support to those individuals in that time?
The one thing that I keep coming back to that has always held true for me, my grandma used to say it all the time, this too shall pass. And the other thing that I always look toward is every single thing that happens, there's always a silver lining to it. We can always find the positive, even in some of the most dire circumstances, that maybe it'll progress and make change for a community or a culture. Or maybe it'll increase the family connectedness. And, after a funeral, I tell people, man, we can always find something that will keep us with that hope in mind. Always find something that silver lining possesses so that we can grow in our faith. And that normally seems to be a good thing for folks.
Well, my faith in God is the first thing that I lean on no matter what. I did not grow up in the church. I got saved relatively late in terms of when people get saved, right before graduation. And for me, the instant time of struggle at that time was talking to my parents about my change of heart to move from Miami's business school to go to a school to study to be a youth pastor, which I knew very little about in the first place, but just felt like that was God's calling. But but what helps me is what faith means to me in those situations is that I know in every situation that I don't walk alone with it, that God is very faithful to be with me through whatever it is that I'm going through. But more importantly, he's there to guide me through what I'm going through, that he provides a way out. And I think like Billy was saying, even in times of struggle, God will always bring good from that. It's just a matter of recognizing the good when it comes.
Well, I always let people know to reflect on the times of when they can reference where God has brought them out of tough situations. So, if he did it then, he can do it. If he done it back then, he can do it again. And so therefore, so you already have built-in confidence that if he brought you out of this situation, he can bring you out of what you're going through now. And again, trouble won't last always. Things won't always last. It won't always be like this. So again, that is where we go back to the previous question, where your faith has to kick into overdrive, and you have to, be confident and rest assured that if he done it before, he'll do it again, because it's the same God. We serve the same God. So the God of your grandmother, your great grandmother, the faith that you pull from, and whomever, was your pillar of faith that you, as a person, that you got that strength from, it, or your guidance from. Then that's the same God that you serve, same strength that will get you through.
Well, I remind people of the story of Jonah, who starts off actually trying to run away from God. And if you notice the progression, he starts in Jerusalem, so he goes down to the seashore. Then from there, he goes down to the ship. And then the ship, he goes down into the hold of the ship. He's in constant ascent. And finally, when he's in the belly of the whale, when he's at his absolute worst, that's when he reaches out in a very profound prayer to God. So I remind people sometimes that we are tested by what happens, not that bad things happen to us because it's a test, but in our difficult times, sometimes because we have no other way to turn, we learn that even God is down there in the darkest of places. Also, there's a famous story about a rabbi. His name was Nathan, and they called him Gamzu. And Gamzu in Aramaic means also this, because he would always say, no matter what happened, Gamzu Latova, this also is for good. And so the second part of that is to understand that within any crisis, there is good to be found, as was mentioned before. And it doesn't feel good. It hurts sometimes terribly. We feel our hearts breaking. And it doesn't mean that we should say, well, push away the bad feelings because we know there's going to be something good. Now, those feelings of despair and hurt are real. But we know in the back of our minds that, yes, something will come out of this, that God is with us on that path, and that in whatever way, and we can never predict. We don't know how long it takes. But yes, there is something of good that will come out of it.
Some people tuning in today might be doing so because they're actually looking for a spiritual path or faith to lean on because of the stress that they're experiencing right now. So what could you say to someone who's maybe new to your faith or your religion, or who's just someone who's wandering and is lost?
Well, I think we have to acknowledge that our world is really chaotic right now. And the truth is that this is when we need faith the most. And when we talk about wanting understanding, God is all about understanding. When it comes to community, God is all about community, and all the things that we're seeking out in order to make our daily lives better living together is through the knowledge that God wants that too. So, for me, just the understanding that I'm not going to be able to figure it out on my own, and nobody else is going to either. It's through, number one, discussing things together. But more than anything, for me, the idea that we have a responsibility to make our faith evident. And I think most of the problems that we have today are because we take God completely out of the equation. And without God, I feel like a lot of things that people struggle with, whether it be personally or globally, those kind of things are going to be very, very difficult to solve.
So for me, I'm big on to those that may not be walking as spiritually heavy as those, or maybe people deem a pastor or whatever. For me, I just share my everyday testimony of what I've been through, and how the Lord has brought me over, how my faith has when I apply it to my life, how things aren't perfect, but I know that things are going to be all right. And so I just share my testimony, my struggles, and how, the world challenges me and how I overcome it. So it's truly, I just share my testimony, because I can't, quote you every scripture. I may not be able to, do all that. They may not never enter the doors of my church or anyone's church, but what I can leave them with is what I personally went through. And maybe somewhere in that, they'll find the strength in that. Maybe somewhere in that, they'll say, you know what, I may not, fully understand this God thing, but I trust you as a person. So that's where I come from. A point, I just share, hey, you know what, I messed up today. I'm not perfect, or whatever the case may be, whatever situation we're talking to, whether it's them, going through a loss, or job or whatever, because that seems to be what people are dealing with a lot today. With everything going on, is job loss, finance and stuff. So I share with them my stories of how I overcame, dealing with finance, how I come depression, or, people are, going through a lot now. Depression is, there. People are isolated, some, if you will. We're here on Zoom. So, so that's why I just share my own personal testimony.
There's a very interesting story told about the Israeli violinist Yitzhak Perlman. He was a wonderful violinist, and one evening he's doing a performance, and in the midst of the performance, one of the strings break. So immediately a great virtuoso, he's able to calculate everything so that he plays it all on 3 strings. And then another string breaks. And now he's got to work even harder to calculate how to do the whole thing on 2 strings. And of course, right, what happens? The 3rd string breaks. So he plays the whole concerto on 1 string. The number of people who are capable of doing that are infinitesimally small. So we're right now all playing on a violin with 1 string. And so I tell people who are struggling spirituality, that has to become one of the things that you find for yourself. And people come to me and talk about questions they have about spirituality. For me, often the issue is trying to help a person find the right teacher. I don't kid myself, right? I am good for certain people, but there are people who come into my synagogue looking for help, and I know a number of other clergy, and I will recommend them, right, Pastor Shaq? I've done that before. And so what I tell people, especially when you're hurting, this is a time when you have to go around looking for a place where you feel at home, because that's your heart telling you that the message of the place that I am in is coming to me on a different level. So I tell people all the time, go to different churches, go to different places. If you find that the place is meaningful, then go and meet the pastor afterwards and set up an appointment during the week. But don't give up just because 1 or 2 people don't speak to you. We have this deep need. It is there inside of us. And we can't go on playing a violin with 1 string, especially now.
When I run into people who are struggling, it's kind of a combination of all the answers already given. I share who I am, where I've been, what I've been through, and what I've overcome. I remind people that when God created the world, he didn't just organize the world. He created nothing, or he created everything out of nothing, which was sheer chaos, and he brought order to the world. But a lot of times, I think the best piece of advice that I can give to a person is, even as a pastor of over a decade, I don't always have the answers, and I don't always have the right words to speak. And sometimes that's okay. And that's where that faith kicks in. And that's what we lean into. And a lot of times what you realize are people are really just looking for someone to listen to them, someone to accept them and put them in the right direction. And so it's a patient process when you deal with somebody looking down the path of faith. And, you want to give them books and advice, but sometimes the best thing to do is just sit and listen to hear who they are, how God created them, and what you can help them through and with.
Is there a time that you feel comfortable sharing from your own personal experience where your faith was tested, but you feel like you came out on the other side of it?
Oh, by the way, that story about Perlman is apocryphal. It really didn't happen, which is too bad, but it's a great story anyhow. When I was about 11 or 12, I became aware of my family's history and the Holocaust. Both of my parents came from Vienna. My mom left when she was 9. My dad left when he was 14. I lost huge numbers of relatives in the Holocaust. I had 3 grandparents who were killed. And I couldn't imagine that a good God would allow not just a person, I understood a little bit about death, at least I thought I did at 12, but to think that 6 million people were wiped off the face of the earth in a very short period of time, that was more than my understanding of faith could handle. And I essentially stopped believing in God. That didn't mean I didn't go to synagogue. I still did, because I found something there. And I say to people today, that was God calling me. And I just had to be patient enough to hear God's voice calling to me. And what happened is, when I went to college, I took classes in philosophy. And what I found essentially is that philosophy doesn't have any answers about the meaning of life. Nothing. So at that point, I had a choice. I could say, well, I could choose to live in a world where there isn't a God, or I could choose to live in a world where there is God. And I'm going to have to work it out either way. And I decided it's much better to live in a world where there is God, even if I don't understand everything that happens. And slowly, over time, I began to rebuild my understanding, my relationship with God. But still, it suffered even as I got older. I have flashbacks of what happened. So I don't particularly enjoy going to see Holocaust movies, because they, again, make me confront that. But that was really it. And it was understanding that even in those difficult times, I felt called by God, even if I didn't believe in God. But I felt that God was gently leading me down a path which I needed. I needed to take a certain amount of time to be able to process this thing, right? Couldn't talk to my parents about it because it was deeply painful for them. And I didn't know anybody else who I could talk to really about it, who would understand it on the same level. But I was patient. I didn't give up.
When I just got out of college, I got a job working as the part-time youth pastor in the town where I graduated, and I knew it was a part-time thing. And at the end of the summer, it was coming to the pass to where they were beginning to interview people, and all the parents got together. I wouldn't say all, but a large majority of the parents got together and petitioned that they would offer me an interview there. And I didn't end up getting that interview. But then my wife and I, we had 2 different churches that were looking for youth pastors. One looked good on paper in every way, shape, and form. The pastor that was there had just gotten there. So there was stability, they were debt-free, all those kind of things that you look for in a change in location ministerially. And then there was another one that was, on paper, it was terrible. They only offered me the job as an interim thing. They were in the midst of a pastoral search. I came to find out that that pastor had his own youth pastor, who right now is the head of our denomination's youth ministry. So he was well qualified, certainly more qualified than me. But I had gotten really, really, really close to that group of people, those kids and their parents, and we were doing great things. So when it came time for me to begin to try to find a place to go, the first church I landed in, When I got there was just nothing but chaos within the youth group. You know, they were stealing food from the daycare and skipping church and going into the locker room and eating food there, and just all kinds of things. You know, just all kinds of things. So, and I went home every night discouraged and really, really angry with God for moving me from a place where I thought I had made a significant step of faith, and now He was changing again my location for ministry. And for the better part of probably 18 months, I was more policeman than pastor. But it turned out that in ministering at that church, that we began to grow. The kids were really engaged in doing things for others, and had faith that was ingrained in themselves. And it ended up being probably the best period of time in my life being there. And so even though I didn't see God's hand in it at the time, or I didn't agree with what God was doing at the time, having faith and just understanding that, that God has a plan and He only reveals it one step at a time. So it ended up being something where I looked back and thought, God helped me make those decisions to get to where I was. So it was certainly a trying time in my wife and I's life, and definitely trying and challenging for me personally in ministry.
So for me, the one thing that is strange is I knew I was called into ministry at age 16, roughly, and about that same time, I started battling depression, and it just came out of nowhere. I had a good life, came from a nuclear family that was solid, and there was just no reason for it. And I felt for the longest time that would disqualify me from taking a leadership role within the church. And so I battled the call to ministry, and I battled the depression. And so as life went forward and I got into my mid-20s, I went into ministry, and I still to this day battling depression. And but the thing that changed is I started to talk about it from the pulpit, and I'll talk openly about the struggles that I went through, the dark places that my mind can take me with this depression. And what I've discovered is that through sharing my story and being willing to be open up and be essentially vulnerable in front of a group of people, it's this secret shame that seems to rest on people, like, well, I'm depressed, or I'm dealing with anxiety, and I don't know how to talk to people about it. But it's opened up the opportunity and the door to speak to a lot of people about mental health issues and what you can do to overcome them, both spiritually, medically, and just the practices that make for a healthy life. And so for me, that overcoming of depression and that willingness to find my voice and speak about it has made a significant impact in my spirit and the way I look at myself and the way that others see me as well.
For me, I would say it was definitely challenging for me when I was living in Indiana, and I had been there for 12 years and making that move to come back home. So for me, that was a really, really trying time where I really had to seek, really have prayer and really know, like, was this the right move to make? Because it was terrifying, coming home after so many years of going away. So many things have changed. So many things I didn't know. So for me, it was tough, and then it was moving my boys from the school that they have all, that they've been to, and just the whole family move here. And then to start ministry here, as being a woman in ministry and a senior pastor, that was challenging, to say, will I be received? Will I be welcome? Just all those different things that, that came along with it, that whole bag, and having to try to unpack that. And I'm still unpacking it. So, but I knew, that was a move for us, and I definitely don't regret it, but it's still comes with the challenges. I still have to stand in faith every day. So yeah.
Is there a particular verse or practice that you like to use and lean on in these hard times?
The verse that I kind of guide my life by is the book of John 13:15. It says, I've set an example for you that you should do as I have done for you. And it was in the middle of the time when Jesus was washing his disciples' feet. And he's demonstrating at that time what it was like to be a servant. But more than anything, it was a precursor to talk about what he would eventually do on the cross and what he would go through. So he's telling his disciples, you need to follow me even to death. But the one that kind of helps me when I'm overwhelmed, which I think a lot of people are now, is a verse in Psalm 46. I'm going to read it to make sure. God is our refuge and our strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. And I remember that verse because it helps to put things in perspective, that things are never as good as you think they are going to be, and they're never as bad as you think they're going to be. But to invite God to be that source of refuge and strength is, kind of where personally I have to start in order to kind of just get my mind right.
So a verse that comes to my mind and a practice that comes to my mind is part of battling depression is I was very concerned with how other people saw me, and I was worried about their opinion of me, and I thought I either had to be like perfect or I couldn't be a pastor. And so all of this just weighed down on me. And what I realized is the words of Paul in Galatians 1:10, he basically says, am I trying to please God or am I trying to please men? Because if I'm trying to please men, then I'm not a servant of God. And that just kind of alleviated a burden from me. I always had that chameleon mindset. I can get along with just about anybody and just fit in anywhere, but I didn't have my voice. I didn't have my uniqueness that God had given me. And so that passage from Paul, Galatians 1:10, just always resonates in my heart with people who are struggling, because that can just be a burden relief for them. And then the practice that I've learned over the last few years is just the attentiveness to God. Take a moment each day to just pay attention to what God's doing in your life. Sometimes he'll speak to you through scripture or through a book or through reading of an article even. But a lot of times, if you just sit and just be attuned to what his spirit is saying, he'll give you something to go on. He'll provide for you a path to take. But it's a practice you have to develop, that attentiveness to what the Lord is saying to you.
Sure. In our daily service, right, we pray 3 times a day, and many of the prayers that we do take little bits and pieces from different parts from the Bible. And the one that always strongly hit me, even when I didn't quite understand it, was for your salvation, I wait all day, Lishuatcha kivinu kol hayom, which is Psalm 25:5. And every time I read that, didn't matter what was going in my life, it just felt like it was drawing me closer to God. And even on good days when I wasn't looking for anything specific, I felt really good. But those words, just being able to repeat them, and I suggest to people, look, at a lot of our service consists of Psalms, and there are groups of people who chant Psalms every day. Psalms are difficult language to understand. It was written 3,000 years ago. So the wording and the context and all this is difficult. But there are people who practice in our tradition who read 10 Psalms every morning in addition to the service. So they're essentially going through the book of Psalms relatively quickly. And what happens is that the different verses apply to different moments in your life. In other words, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And the Psalms address just every aspect of life. So something that might work for me today, but then I have a crisis tomorrow or the next week, all of a sudden, a verse will pop into my head. And that's part of the loss that we have, right? That people we read so much other material, right? In ancient times, your education consisted, and even not in so ancient times, consisted of memorizing chunks of sacred literature so that they become a part of you. And when that happens, then it becomes something you can follow. I don't know how many people can read a verse from scripture, never having seen it before, and all of a sudden, sometimes it happens, but having studied it and made it a part of you, then you have this incredible spiritual arsenal. Shouldn't use the word arsenal. You have this incredible spiritual vocabulary that is already part of you. And then when the crisis or the moment of testing comes, you've already got something that you've connected to.
So yeah, so for me, Jeremiah 29:11, that's one of my favorite scriptures, a verse that I, share. And for me, again, it's just knowing that there's a hope and a plan of expectation. And so that's what a lot of things that I sit in my heart when I'm feeling uncertain, or if I'm feeling, just not for sure, or just even it's encouraging too, because I know that there is a hope and a future and a plan for my life. So I have purpose and my life means something.
Shaq, on Sunday you hosted a prayer vigil, and there were several faith leaders who were there. One message that came out several times is that we need to shed a light on the darkness that we're experiencing right now. You also said that you're a very prayerful person, that you grew up in prayer, that you use prayer quite a bit right now, but that prayer isn't all that we can use. You called for action. So can you share with us, what are some of those things that you were calling on that had to do with prayer? Obviously it was a prayer vigil, but then also the actions that you felt were really important for us to be considering right now.
A lot of times, faith leaders, obviously, people can count on us to pray and be, to speak faith and, we want to be peaceful. But I didn't want people to take, the tone of the post, of the vigil, peaceful prayer vigil, as just our only posture is going to be prayer. Yes, we are going to pray, we're going to believe, but we're also going to put action behind that to strategize and organize those things. So it is saying, hey, and building on the foundation of prayer to guide us, on what to say, what to do, what things are going to be, necessary for our community. Because it's not just general, just in communities in general, but what specifically are the things that's going to help heal and bridge the racial divide that is in our community. So what specifically? So it is, that was foundational. Just one saying, hey, we came together so we know we can do it again. So now let's come together at a table to talk about those things and have those conversations. So what does, entrepreneurship look like? What does minority-owned business look like? What does, events, what do those things look like now? How can we, come together and strategize on things and have those conversations together versus, helping you see it through my lens, because you may not see it how I see, race. You may, somebody else may think, oh, it's totally fine, but maybe I can help enlighten you by, again, my testimony or something maybe I've experienced to help, bring light to the situation. So that's what we're saying, that we're not just going to pray only, but we do there is a plan.
Dave, is there any lasting message that you would like to leave us with?
I don't know if it's my illustration or if I heard it somewhere and just brought it to mind, but the analogy that I have given people during this time is one of a greenhouse. It has all kinds of different flowers and plants and stuff like that. And the obviously the gardener tends to those. And then maybe there's some plants that aren't doing as well, that they're wilting and need special attention. And so the idea with what's going on here is not that it's it's one race only. It's that particular race is struggling, and it's up to the rest of us to give special attention. It doesn't mean we ignore the other things that we need to deal with society, but for right now, there is an incredible amount of energy in the idea that somehow we are more divided than we thought we were. And I don't think that's true. I just think right now, the vivid nature of George Floyd's death and then the instances that have come up prior, there's just so much energy in it. What we need to understand is, look, we don't have to be angry to get something accomplished. We don't have to do, it's time to sit down and make some meaningful changes about how the government in general deals with the African American community. And up to now, we have not done well. We need to do better.
Billy, what would you like to share?
You know, there's only been really one time in my life where I experienced walking as a minority, and that was at Miami University of Hamilton in a Black World Studies class with Mark Christian. I can even remember his name. It was a sociology class, and it was me and a bunch of Black students, and it was uncomfortable to walk into a culture that was so overwhelmingly not what you're used to and where you come from. And so I'm very thankful in my life that I've served in the Nazarene church and the Wesleyan church, where we believe that women have an equal part, where we believe that race has an equal part, and the unity of the two, you know, minorities working with the majority, bringing about change for the good of the community. I'm just very grateful that I've had the experience that I've had, because empathy is one of the best tools that we can utilize as we go through all of this. You know, you've got people who wear masks and people who don't wear masks. And so try to place yourself in someone else's shoes. And that allows you to see things from a different cultural lens and a different perspective. And that's where healing is going to begin, is when you can start to see from the other side of that line. Part of my community outreach is I'm a chaplain for the city of Fairfield, and I work with the police department very often. And so I try to put myself in their position and how they see the world, especially right now with all the turmoil. And unless we can have that empathy, there's not going to be healing. And so we want to make sure that we tell people to keep the conversation going, keep communication open, and just be willing to sit down and hear out people and love them where they're at. And that's what's going to bring forward what needs to happen.
Eric, what lasting words of advice do you have to offer?
I tell people to stop reading the newspaper and watching television so much. It's not that there aren't bad things that happen, but I think that there are a lot more good things than bad things. And it's not that we should ignore the bad things, not at all. But if we simply, I saw a picture of a rally where people are gathering in a large city. And for 2 hours, the gathering was very peaceful. Hundreds and hundreds of people gathering to make their feelings known. And then the leaders, it's a curfew, 15 minutes before the end of the protest, people with bullhorns said, okay, it's time to go home, go back to your places. We need you to comply. Please do so. And the vast majority of people did. And a few troublemakers decided to hang on. So of course, when the evening news went on, you saw 30 minutes of the peaceful rally and 30 minutes of the violence. And it made it seem as if the 30 minutes of violence was equally representative of the peaceful time. Well, I get it, right? Newspapers and television, they have to sell. And what sells is conflict and violence. That kind of ugliness doesn't do us any good. We need to make sure that people see stories of the wonderful things that people did, that people who showed up the next morning to clean up all the stuff, and people who reached out and decided they needed to protect, and police officers who were as appalled by this and got together with marchers and marched as well and protested because they were hurt by this. So, of course, this is a clarion call and a moment in our people's history, our country's history, to really see if we can make a change. But don't believe everything you read, and don't believe everything you see on TV, because even if it's there, it's not the truth. It's just a way for some people to present America in its very worst form. We're better than that.